With Xenoblade X Definitive Edition just around the corner, there's no better time than now to get back to the profiles, and kicking things off is a 2-for-1 special. They are two halves of the untossed core crystal, two sides of the same coin, Alpha and A. Designed by Mutsuko Saito, Alpha, or Arufa in the Japanese version, is voiced by Shizuma Hodoshima and Blake Ritson, and A, voiced by Rina Sato and Rosie Day, are original characters created for the prequel of Xenoblade Chronicles 3, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Future Redeemed. In terms of appearance, while mostly identical to Alvis, who will get a video all of his own, Alpha has a bit sharper facial features, paler skin, a necklace with the untossed core crystal, and initially has two wings of light similar to the ones Zanza had upon his rebirth. A has a single wing of light, and wears a grayish-blue bodysuit with red, black, and white accents, a collar, shoulder cape, and white boots, and wears the untossed core as an earring. Now, in terms of personality, while both are very calculative and logical, Alpha is characterized to act as a destructive force, while A highlights traits like emotion and compassion and acts as a stabilizing force. Similar to Zanza, Alpha has nihilistic views on those from the Bionis as well as Allrest and desires to wipe them out, believing that life born from the city are the future, not realizing how his own plans to bring salvation for those lives would condemn them into another destructive cycle, ultimately repeating Klaus's folly, not seeing the bigger picture of how the city's inhabitants are not the only ones suffering as a result of the nature of Ionios and the machination of Mobius, nor how he perpetrates similar destruction in the name of his promised world. Alpha is also manipulative, preying on people's weaknesses and emotions to strengthen his power. Despite his logical mindset, Alpha is prone to rage and frustration towards his enemies. One thing to note regarding A is that jokes tend to go over her head, such as the time Matthew joked how it might rain brogs when Glimmer greeted the group one morning.
Did I just hear a hello from you? What next? A rain of brogs?
Plain rain's bad enough.
Both Alpha and A wield the Monado, but whereas Alpha's Monado looks like the standard Monado from Xenoblade 1, A's is seen in a new form. Now, in order to properly explain A and Alpha's story, we first have to go all the way back before the creation of the Xenoblade universe, back to our very own Earth. In the early 21st century, a device called the Conduit would be found in Africa, and it would be discovered that it possessed the ability to connect different dimensions and warp reality itself. In order to maintain the Conduit, the Trinity Processor, a collective of artificial intelligence that consists of 3 biocomputers known as Numa, Logos, and the one important for today's video, Ontos. But in the year 20XX, a group of rebels known as the Saviorites attacked the first low orbit station, Radamanthus, in order to claim the Conduit for themselves, as they were unsatisfied with how the unified world government was handling the world's problems. But just before the rebels were about to break through the station's defenses, delusioned with humanity and believing it was his divine right, the scientist Klaus would activate the Trinity in order to use the Conduit's power to rebuild the world in the way he imaged it, only to end up splitting the planet in two, creating the world of Bionis and Mechanis and the world of Allrest, causing almost all life on Earth to vanish, as well as the Trinity being separated. Logos and Numa would end up in the world of Allrest, while Ontos would go to the world of Bionis and Mechanis. At some point after the Bionis was created, through unknown means, Ontos would awaken and go by the name of Alvis and would become a disciple of Zanza, the physical manifestation of Klaus's dark desires. But knowing that Zanza's desires would ultimately bring the end of the world, Alvis would guide and aid Shulk and his allies to be at equal fighting capability as the Mad God, and let fate decide whose will and determination was stronger, with Shulk succeeding in slaying the Mad God. With Zanza's defeat, Alvis would return to his core crystal and wouldn't be seen until a year after the reclamation and restoration of Alchemith, when Shulk would find the Ontos core crystal on the outskirts of Colony 9, with Melia claiming it was a gift from Alvis. Years later, Ontos would come to play an important role once again when the worlds of Bionis and Allrest began to merge back into one, but due to the world's different biological makeups, the merging would result in the destruction of both worlds. To avoid this tragedy, Queens Melia and Nia would form a plan to save the peoples and cultures of their respective worlds, constructing an ark known as Origin, which would contain all their society's knowledge and their citizens' literal souls, allowing them to be reborn after their worlds were reconstructed and separated back into their original states. The Antas core would be used as the foundation of Origin, almost as a reflection as to how the Conduit was the foundation of the Trinity processor. But at the moment when both worlds were to make contact, the fears within the souls housed in Origin would manifest in a being known as Zed, who would hijack control of Origin and freeze time to avoid the possibility that the plan would fail, and force the inhabitants of both worlds in a never-ending war of death and rebirth in the world of Ionios. But at some point after Zed's takeover, Antas would reawaken, and as a result of Logos and Nuba's absence, he would become more than a machine. For while Alvis was able to maintain a personality solely through his absorbing of Klaus's lingering regrets, but as a result of Klaus's death, whose life was connected to Zanza's, that personality was lost. This leads us to the events in Future Redeemed where Antas, now proclaiming himself as Alpha, deemed the lives of Kevis and Agnian people from the Bionis and Albras respectively, as unnecessary for the future, and sought to create a new future in which no traces of the old worlds would remain. Rex, Shulk, and Zed would attempt to stop him, but they were effortlessly defeated in a single strike from the Monado. At some point afterwards, Alpha would subjugate the Fog Beasts and turn them into his agents. Around a decade later, Alpha's core would be found by Niall, a citizen of the city. To create his new future, Alpha planned to bring the city's people, due to them being the only ones naturally born in Ionios, to a new world while annihilating the world in the process, using Niall to do so. However, in an effort to stop Alpha, Zed would send Council N to destroy the city, but during his attack, N would be confronted by his son Gondor, who would use his Ouroboros powers to prevent his father from killing Niall, which would result in the destruction of the city and the scattering of the surviving citizens, temporarily putting Alpha's plans on hold. But as fate would have it, a fragment of his being composed of his memories and discarded consciousness was unexpectedly freed and attained self-awareness, becoming A. A would find a half-dead Matthew after the city's destruction and help him recover, forming a mentor-student-like relationship with the young man, helping him refine his fighting style and chastising him for his recklessness.
Can't even seem to break it!
I told you we should have left alone. But you had to stick your oar in, didn't you? Matthew?
Lecture me later, eh? Aye, first things first.
You're impossible.
They would travel together with the intentions of finding Matthew's sister Niall and city survivors when the two would come across the aftermath of a battle between Kevis and Agnes. Matthew would spot the Kevis and Adian soldiers, Nickel and Glimmer, the last two standing from the battle, and rush to stop their senseless fighting by using his Ouroboros powers, much to A's annoyance, when then A's phenomenal skills in battle were displayed when she killed 2 consuls and destroyed 2 flame clocks with little to no effort. Since Nickel and Glimmer were free from their connections to the flame clocks, A and Matthew would take them in, but later that night, unable to accept her new reality, Glimmer would run off and search for an Adian colony. Despite being awake at the time, A believed that Glimmer should be allowed to make her own choice and refrain from saying anything. Matthew, however, knowing that she would be killed on sight for not being connected to a flame clock due to his actions, believed it was their responsibility to go after her, with A showing her intellect and a bit of her cheeky nature at Matthew's expense.
How should I know? Let's just comb the area, yeah? Leave no stone unturned.
If we assume she's trying to return to her own troops, she'll likely have headed northwest. That whole area is Agnian territory. It's very probable that a colony would be stationed there. Save for perhaps your hair, there's little need to comb anything. Did you follow that, Matthew?
Wow. Hey, you are so clever. Truly, your intellect knows no bounds.
The party eventually would find Glimmer with Shulk, who were being attacked by Consul W. Upon joining the battle, Shulk instantly recognized A as Alvis, thanks to the Antas core crystal earring she was wearing, and in turn, A recognized Shulk. Later in the fight, Rex would appear and help them defeat Consul W. and would later introduce the party to the Liberators. The next morning, Shulk and Rex would lead the party to Colony 9. When word of one of the colony search parties had gone missing near Ragu Lake, the party would set out to investigate when later that night, Shulk would inquire why A's appearance had changed. Rex would state that the Trinity processor was designed in a way that Logos was the male persona, Numa was the female, and Ontos was somewhere in between. A would go on to explain to Shulk and Rex how she was freed from Ontos when they were interrupted by Alpha, who had come to collect Matthew. But due to Matthew's confusion of the situation, it would cause Alpha to become impatient and attack, until N showed up and would try to kill Niall. Matthew would stop him, but before he could retaliate, A would step in and inform Matthew that N was his very own great-grandfather, much to his shock. Alpha would then return to Origin, telling the party that he would be waiting for their arrival. Returning to Colony 9, while Shulk and Rex would divulge the full story of Origin to Matthew and the others, Linka would inquire why Alpha had chosen Niall as his vessel. Rex would state that it was likely due to the fact that Niall had Agnian ancestry, and in terms of hereditary traits, core crystals got dominance. A would follow up the statement stating that Niall's emotions also played a factor, likely being the most crucial element of all. Matthew would try to argue against this statement, but A would remind him that when a person loses the thing they cherish the most, they change, and Niall's feelings of anguish and hatred toward the world at the time made her the perfect fodder to Alpha. After the meeting, A would advise Matthew to hear N's side of the story about what had happened in the city before passing judgment, and then preparing their journey to Origin to stop Alpha, as well as helping the Liberators and city survivors with many tasks around the colony. As the party made their way to Origin, Shulk, hoping to have some insight with their battle against Alpha, would inquire A about her power of visions, since he no longer had his. A would quickly refute Shulk for his thinking, reminding him that there was no single established future, that it was one's will that gave shape to that future. Now, as a fun little side note, it would also be around this point A would get the opportunity to bond with her niece Glimmer in the side quest A Melody Sustained, when the girl gained an interest in learning how to play the lute after she found a broken one and got it repaired, with A offering her to teach her the basics. And later in the side quest Breaking Ground, when she asked Glimmer to help her in a supervisor role when Matthew united both City and Liberator factions to help repair armories, which would also showcase A's acknowledgement of Matthew's growth both as a person and a leader. The party would eventually make their way into Origin when they would find themselves inside a memory of Earth, shortly before Klaus's experiment, with A adding that there was only one being in all of existence remaining that could remember such a time, that being Alpha. The party would soon then find Niall, who would try to convince them that the world that Alpha had promised could be like the one they were looking at, but A would show Niall the land of Moritha, the aftermath of Klaus's experiment, and what Alpha's proposed new world would ultimately become. Still in denial, it would only be after Matthew would point out that Niall would be no better than Mobius if she went along with Alpha that the girl finally accepted the truth. Unfortunately, Alpha would regain control of Niall and brought the heroes back to the Ark. It would be here that Alpha and A would briefly deliberate with one another, with A reminding Alpha that she was his conscience, where Alpha insisted that the future had no need for the things of the past, and that conscience was useless to the Trinity processor, before the two parties engaged in battle, with Alpha finding a small amount of turmoil in Matthew's heart, and would try to pull Matthew's soul into Origin and convince him to see things his way, only to be stopped by the arrival of N, forcing Alpha to unleash his true form, that of a large humanoid figure with an empty mask-like face. In a final effort to defeat Alpha, N would grant Matthew the powers of his Sword of the End, which contained the power of Logos, and combining it with Matthew's Ouroboros Knuckles, which contained the power of Numa, granting the party the true power of Ouroboros in defeating Alpha once and for all. As Alpha started to disintegrate, he would tell Matthew that his actions had made the future uncertain, and asks him if he has any regrets, and, to his surprise, Matthew would tell him that he would always have regrets, but he would always continue moving forward. As Matthew walked away to rejoin his friends, Alpha would smile and then vanish. But with Alpha's defeat, A, Rex, and Shulk would reveal that without Alpha, Origin would require a new avatar to keep Ionia stable, which would be the three of them. Nicole and Glimmer would voice their disagreement, begging the three of them not to go, but Rex would reassure them that they would see them all again when the worlds were restored, with him and Shulk giving their life force to their respective children. A would tell them that it was against the rules set in Ionios, but would agree to look the other way after Rex says that Logos and Numa would not hesitate to do the same, with Shulk thanking her and calling her by the name Alvis. A would then give one final message to the party and told them that their efforts, at some point in time, would finally pay off, with the scene mirroring the same ending in Xenoblade 1. As they entered the rift, Shulk and Rex would ask A if she had foreseen the current turn of events, but A would state that while she sees all the possibilities there could be, their hopes have always been a constant in the flow of time, which would come true when 1,000 years into the future, Zed would be defeated and the worlds of Allrest and Bionis were restored to their original states, before Origin successfully combines the two worlds into one, where A's role in this new world is waited to be seen, and hopefully allowing her to reunite with Matthew once again. Alpha's final form parallels Deus from Xenogears, in that they are both white, slender biomechanical mechs born from artificial intelligences linked to an object of infinite power. A's Japanese voice actress, Rina Sato, is selectable as an avatar voice in Xenoblade Chronicles X, and also voices Mai Magus in Xenosaga. A is also the only playable character from Future Redeem to not make any type of appearance or is referenced in Xenoblade Chronicles 3. And a little bonus of in-game trivia: while A's gender is never stated in the English version of the game and is exclusively referred to by name, according to the game files, the internal value assigned to the gender of A is 1, which is used for female characters in the series. Moreover, according to the Xenoblade 3 official art book, Ionios Moments, A is described as a josei, which means female or woman. And that is the story of Alpha and A. What did you think of their characters and roles within the Xenoblade mythos? Leave a phenomenal comment down below, and I'll see you in the next one.
Fortune favors us. This blade will guide us to victory.